Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight I want to welcome the Parish of Rock to the show. Tonight we are tackling episode 2 in our Slade series. Tonight we're going to look at the 1969 album Beginnings and 1970s Play It Loud, so let's get started.
Grant is changing the world one track at a time on Grant's Rock Warehouse.
Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight is episode 2 in our Slade series, and look who's here with me. We've got the Parish. Wait a minute, Parish. The Parish of Rock. And we are going to talk about the next, the first show we did, ladies and gentlemen, the link's down below. We did like an introductory show, kind of throwing this whole album. What do we want to call it? This is a series. And so tonight we're going to look at Beginnings, which was Ambrose Slade. That came out, 69?
69.
And then we're going to look at the second album, which technically, it's still Slade, but technically they adopted the name Slade, and we're going to go with Play It Loud from 1970. So we're just going to look at the records, and basically we're here to turn you on to Slade and kind of steer you in a direction, and maybe you want to check these out. Maybe you don't, but it kind of gives you a little bit of insight into the record, because really, who is talking Slade here in the States? Well,
we are.
Parish and I are. So anyway, Parish, welcome to the show. Nice to see you. Always nice to talk music.
Yeah, good to be back. Thank you for having
That's good.
Yeah, good to be talking Slade.
Yeah, well, who else am I going to get to talk Slade? I would get some members of Quiet Riot in, but most of them aren't here, so, I don't know what to do.
No.
Anyway, Beginnings, produced by Roger Wake. Now, so this record, 1969, produced by Roger Wake and the band. Now, before Parish and I started recording, I'm going, Parish, who is Roger Wake? Well, Parish looked it up, and, go ahead. Tell them who, The Move, for one.
They produced The Move, and they also produced a British beat combo, Dozy, Mickey, Titch, or whatever they're called. I forgot what they're called now.
Yeah,
Dozy, Mick, and Titch.
Yeah, and they didn't really have any success over here. So
yeah, they had a couple hits in the 60s in the UK.
Yeah, did they put out any albums? Do you know, or were they just a singles band?
A singles band, really. Yeah.
So anyway, Ambrose Slade. They originally started out as the In-Betweens in the mid-60s, transitioned to Ambrose Slade, and then they eventually became Slade. So if anybody knows the history of Slade, they were discovered by Chas Chandler, who was in the Animals, who also discovered Jimi Hendrix. He brought Jimmy, over to the UK, and then eventually Jimmy came back. But, they're in good company with Chas. Chas produced the second album. But right now, the Parish and I are going to look at this first album. So, Parish, I'm going to throw it over to you. What's your thoughts on this record? And what would you, I don't know, give your rating at the end, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Before we go into the album, just some interesting facts at this time. So Noddy Holder joined Slade in 65 or 66. Prior to Noddy joining, Robert Plant was auditioned and was rejected, because Robert Plant also grew up in the Wolverhampton area, as did Slade. So they were competing in local bands all the time. Now, apparently, Robert Plant says he turned them down. Slade say they rejected him. So you can pick the bones out of that to know which way round it was. The other thing that's an interesting fact is that Noddy Holder's father was a roadie for Robert Plant's band that he was in the mid-60s.
Well,
so
I didn't know that.
There was a big overlap between, and even through the 70s, there was a lot of competition between Led Zeppelin and Slade, and they were always taking the piss at each other because of that competition that was taken during during the mid '60s. So it's quite interesting to know that kind of chemistry. The other band that was going on in the West Midlands at the same time, and there's a bit of overlap we'll come to in a moment, would have been The Move with Roy Wood and Jeff Lynne. So they were in bands about the same time as Slade was starting as well. So there was a bit of competition between those people as well. So it was quite a big scene, really, and quite an important scene moving on when you think about how big Slade was, how big The Move became, and then Jeff Lynne with ELO, and obviously Robert Plant with Led Zeppelin. So it was quite a strong period for music in the West Midlands at that time.
I do have a question to talk about Jeff Lynne for a second. Of course, we know he came from the Idle Race to The Move. I really don't know this answer. This is why I'm asking. You could maybe call this a tangent, ladies and gentlemen. But how big were the Idle Race over in the UK? I mean, obviously they must have been something because Roy brought Jeff into The Move. But how were the Idle Race perceived?
I'd never heard of them.
You'd never heard of the Idle Race?
Not at the time. Only later when I got into ELO and then went back into what Jeff Lynne had done previously. But in the '60s, I'd never heard of Idle Race. But it's one of those, hold those thoughts, because that name will come up again as we go through the album.
It will, because it will pop up.
It will do.
Yeah.
So moving on to the album itself. So the album's beginnings, I don't know if you can see it. There's the kind of, it's not coming up, is it? Can you see the cover there?
I'll put the cover up. You don't, don't worry about it.
So some interesting things about, the first thing I would say about the album cover, there you go, is
right there.
That's it. Slade have a habit of going topless on their album covers. They do it again on an album. Why people are interested in looking at their upper torsos, I don't know. But and on the back of the cover, they're stood there again in all their glory on the back of the cover, being topless. So they obviously had a thing about showing off their chests for some reason. The other thing that's quite interesting is that in the States, the album was called Ballsy. It wasn't called Beginnings. So when it was released in America at the time, it was called Ballsy. Quite why, I don't know. But anyway, that was the title in America. The album's interesting in that it's got 4 original tracks by Slade, and it's got 8 cover versions. Which nowadays you would think that was odd, wouldn't you? Having 8 cover versions.
I think it's odd, but you think about the '60s. A lot of these bands were doing cover versions of everything else. But you know what I find odd though is that the Beatles pretty much changed everything. Okay, right?
Yeah.
Beatles were all self-contained. By Hard Day's Night they wrote everything. Rubber Soul they wrote everything. But this album that came out in 1969, I just find it kind of odd that there's a lot of cover versions on it because the Beatles changed everything.
Yeah, well, the reason for that was they were gigging around the West Midlands, particularly around Wolverhampton and Walsall, and they were mainly doing covers. And the songs that are on the album are songs that they had in their live set at the time. Polydor wanted to release an album. The 4 songs that were on the album, they wrote for the album. They weren't doing them live at all at the time.
Okay.
So they kind of went from a covers band, and the covers that are on there, and we'll go through them a bit later, but they're all songs that would not have been known in the UK. They were not artists that were particular, with the exception of maybe the 1 or 2, which we'll talk about. Generally, they would not have been songs that would have been known in the UK. Yeah. So to most people who would have been watching them live, they would have thought they were originals, I guess. Somebody from Polydor saw them, thought they had potential, and they were rushed in to record an album. So they wrote the 4 songs were written for the album. And the rest of it are just cover tracks that they were doing at the time. So, and quite a mixed bag, as we'll find in a minute, of the songs that they did. Not all obvious choices, I don't think, for a band like Slade to be covering. So
yeah,
quite interesting.
A lot of these are fairly obscure. Yeah, you're talking over the UK, and you're 100% right. A couple of them people might know, but for the most part, They play them, and they could be Slade originals for any, all you know.
Yeah. So, shall we go into the
Yeah,
album
let's just
itself,
look
then?
at it. Yeah, let's just take a look at it. So it opens up with Genesis, which is written by the band, Dave Hill, Noddy,
Yeah.
Jim, and Don. But you know what I find? I don't have a problem with the track, but we're looking at an album opener and it's pretty mellow. And I'm like going, well, wouldn't you want to have something that really brings you into the record? But
Well,
it's a
I think there's
mellow
something
opener.
even more. It's also something even more odd about it. If you think about Slade, you think about Noddy Holder and Noddy Holder's vocals, and that was almost their kind of strength, if you like. This is an instrumental. So the very first song by Slade on their first album doesn't feature Noddy Holder singing.
Yeah.
Which I think is bizarre. I think that's really odd. But clearly at that time, they didn't see necessarily that Noddy's strength or his voice was going to be a strength moving forward. So I quite like it, but like you say, it's quite mellow, but it's quite good. It was repurposed on the next album, which we'll talk about a bit later. They added lyrics to the song, and it's basically redone on the next album as Know Who You Are. So they do, as I say, put vocals to it. I think as an opener, it's okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
But as you say, it's not a statement of intent, though, is it? It's not telling you what's to come, but not just for Slade generally, but for the album.
But I must say, if you're looking for the Slade that we all know and love, it's not here yet. This is still very mid 60s. Obviously, you could tell this, we're talking mid to late 60s. It's not a very heavy record. They're doing a lot of covers, and a lot of the covers aren't that far off from the original versions, but it's okay. You got to put it where it came out. But I'm just surprised how many covers there are again, but that's all right. It's okay. It's a decent debut, everybody's next one, John Kay. Well, this is a Steppenwolf song.
It is. Yeah.
Now, when I listen to it, it's a decent pop. It sounds very poppy. It's a decent pop song, but I didn't recognize it as a Steppenwolf song when I first heard it.
Interesting. I think it's very faithful to the original, actually. I don't think that it's particularly different, other than Dave Hill's guitar. I think Dave Hill's guitar has turned up, and particularly on the outro, I think Dave Hill's guitar sounds really good. And I have to say, that's one of the things about the album I really like is you don't typically think of Dave Hill as a virtuoso guitarist. Later on, he's known more for what he wears and the gimmicks and the haircut. But on these earlier albums, he's actually, I think, a really good guitarist, and it comes through a lot more. I think these earlier albums.
I think that's a good point. He really stands out on these records. But yeah, for the covers, they don't really add anything new to these. They're pretty faithful to the originals. But it sounds like Slade. There's no mistaking who the band is.
Doesn't make it's Slade. I think it's Noddy's voice generally. I think if you took his voice out, I think the rest of it, I don't think does, not on this album. I don't think a lot of the musicianship particularly sounds Slade-like.
No, they kind of grow into it.
But there's no mistaking Noddy's vocals from day one, really. So
yeah. So second track. Go ahead.
Decent, but nothing special, I would say. Steppenwolf.
Third track is Knocking Nails Into My House, which is an Idle Race track written by Jeff Lynne. But in my notes I wrote, hey, it's a decent cover, but it doesn't add much to the original version for me. But
I mean, if I hadn't looked it up, as I knew it was a Jeff Lynne song, I've always thought it was a Move song until I actually looked it up for this program. I didn't realise it was an idle race song, and I just think it sounds like the Move. I think it's a good song. It's very catchy. In fact, as a song, it's quite an earworm. I mean, that pre-chorus of "Here Comes a Man in a Van," looking very angry at me. It just has stuck in my head over the last week or so since I've been listening again to the albums. So I think it's a very good song. I like their version of it. I think Noddy's vocals are very strong on this particular version, and I think that's the thing that differentiates it from the original. And I have to say, it's my favourite song on the album. I think it's really good.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I think it's up there. For the covers, I totally agree. Fourth track is Roach Daddy, which is written by the band, and it's basically just a blues number. When I hear this, though, it kind of reminds me of the Small Faces, but it's not quite at the same level as the Small Faces. And I kind of look at this. I don't know how you look at this track, but I don't know. I kind of look at it this track follows the Idle Race song, and it's nowhere in that league. No. So I kind of look at this as kind of filler. I don't know. How do you look at it?
I think it's just meat and potatoes blues rock, really.
Yeah.
It's not. I think Dave Hill's guitar on it's really good. So from a guitar point of view, I think it stands out again. I don't like Noddy's vocals on it though. He's trying to sing in a higher pitch to normal, and I think his vocals sound very screechy as a result of that. I think later he's learnt to lower the pitch on what he's singing, but there's a few songs on this one where I don't think his vocal range quite matches what he's trying to achieve. It's okay, but I could live with never hitting it again. To be honest, it's just ordinary.
Mm-hmm. So, what's your thoughts of "Ain't Got No Heart," which is a Mothers of Invention song? Frank Zappa wrote it. Was Frank and the Mothers pretty obscure? Well, this is 69. I mean, how well known were they over there in the UK?
Over here, very obscure.
Okay.
Very obscure over here as far as I know. Yeah, it was only in the 70s when he went solo that he started to have success, I think. Certainly, I mean, bearing in mind, I was in 1969, I would have been 6, so I wouldn't have known that much.
Yeah, but you were listening to all this. You were listening to all this stuff, obviously. Parish. You know you were.
Absolutely, yeah. Right. So, but it's a very full cover version, I think. From an instrumental point of view, I don't think it sounds particularly different. What I think sounds different is Noddy's vocals. Noddy sings it very differently, I think, to the way Frank Zappa did, and I think that's what makes it stand out as a version. I like it.
I love it.
Yeah.
But
it's a good version, but it's not his vocals.
Yeah, but it does sound it doesn't sound much different though, other than Noddy, his vocals. But it could have been like a session off of Freak Out, because it does have that tonality, which is, I'm gonna give them some props because it's not that far off. Slade's not really doing anything different to it, but hey, if you don't know the song and you're living in it's fresh. So there you go. Mm-hmm. Pity the Mother. What's your thoughts on that?
So this finishes side 1.
Yeah.
I think it's really an interesting song because it's so untypical of Slade. It's melancholy, it's haunting, it's very epic. I won't go as far as to say it's prog, but it's probably as close as Slade ever got to a prog song in some ways. I find Noddy's vocals again a bit screechy, though. A bit like I said earlier, I think he struggles a bit with that high range on the song.
Yeah.
But it's very ambitious. I like the mix of the acoustic guitars with the electric guitars. But I think the thing that really stands out for me, which comes later with Slade in their catalogue, is Jim Lea's fiddle playing on it, particularly towards the end of the song, is really good. And I think that gives Slade an edge that's different to other bands when he brings in the fiddle and plays that side of it. So I think I respect and admire the song maybe a bit more than I actually like it, but I do think it's different. It's a good change of pace to the rest of the album, and certainly very different to anything else Slade does.
Yeah, I think, it's nice and folky. It's kind of psychedelic to some degree. Kind of reminds me of Fairport Convention. I don't know why it does, but it does. And the fiddle is nice. It just goes to show that these guys are all good players. Decent track. I don't have a problem with this track at all. But when you're looking at this record, it's kind of all over the place. That's really what I'm saying.
Yeah,
It's much
it is.
more of a collection of songs or tracks as opposed to a whole album. See where
Nowadays, if this was released today, it would be outtakes of sessions from other albums, wouldn't it? That's what you would think of it.
It would be,
because that's what it sounds like. It sounds like the things they didn't use on records later. So it's interesting. It was actually their very first album, I think.
So I think everybody probably has an idea what we're talking about with this record. So track 8. Okay, we've got. Let's see, how many do we have? Wow. Okay. We only have on side 2, we only have one original song, Mad Dog Cole, and it's a rocker. It's that basic rock and roll, though. Slade is not setting the world on fire with this track. And we've got more covers. Fly Me High, which is Moody Blues. We've got a Marvin Gaye cover, If This World Were Mine, which was a B-side. That was a B-side to a Tammy Terrell Marvin Gaye track, kind of obscure, and definitely probably obscure in the UK. And of course, they cover the Beatles on this side, which is okay, but I'm not sure we need a Beatles cover. We also have another Steppenwolf cover, Born to Be Wild, and then we also have Ted Nugent. We've got Journey to the Center of the Mind, which is the Amboy Dukes record. So this side is basically all covers except for one song. What's your... I don't mean to laugh, but I mean, there's a lot of covers. What's your thoughts on this side?
Well, if you go for the first one, Mad Dog, what's it called? Mad Dog Cole.
Mad Dog Cole.
It's an instrumental. So they clearly were struggling with writing lyrics at that time.
But you know what? What, Parish, that I find odd is that we're opening up side 2 with an instrumental.
Yeah, so side 1 starts with an instrumental.
But don't you find that really odd?
Yeah, particularly when as I said earlier, Noddy's voice is part of their strength. But the thing I find really interesting is that there's an effect they've got on the guitar in this song that almost sounds like a talk box. I'm sure it's not a talk box. I don't even know if such a thing existed in 1969. No. But that's what the effect reminds me of. So it's quite interesting because of that. But apart from that, it's a disposable, as you say, boogie rocker. Really, it's there's nothing in it. It's okay. The next one is Fly Me High, which is a Moody's Blues song, cover version. Now, this is different to the original. I think this is heavier and rockier than the Moody Blues version. It seems to suit Noddy's vocals, in my opinion. I think it stands out from that point of view. I think it would have been a good choice for a single. It never was a single, but I think it would have been a good choice for a single. And the harmonies work quite well on the. So another highlight for me of the album, I think, is "Fly Me High." So,
and that was the Moody Blues did that. That was just a single. That wasn't on an album.
No, exactly.
I don't know how well that did when the Moody's put it out either. I didn't look that up.
No, I didn't.
I'm just wondering if it really did anything, and maybe they thought, well, this is a great song. Let's, do a version. Yeah. Probably.
But they do a different version, unlike some of the others. I think it is quite rockier than the original. Next one is If This World Were Mine, the Marvin Gaye cover. Odd, really. I mean, it's okay.
But Parish, they pull it off.
I was going to say it's okay. Noddy's vocals actually do. He's able to sing it. His style of music.
Yeah.
I think I wrote down a brave song to cover. And as you say, I don't think it should work, but it does
works. I agree, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Martha, My Dear, I'm not a big fan of Beatle covers. I think the Beatles are sacred and they shouldn't be touched. But I don't know. What's your thoughts on Martha, My Dear?
Well, it's not as good as the original. It's interesting that they seem to have dropped the piano and they've used the guitar to kind of drive the song, which makes it sound a bit different. The thing that I found interesting, though, is it actually reminded me more of Queen when they do that kind of 1920s type sound song than it did of the Beatles. I think it's about Noddy's vocals. His vocal style seemed to sound to me to be more like a Brian May or Roger Taylor than it would do a Paul McCartney. So, so I found that quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, you don't particularly need don't need a Beatles cover to be,
especially in not 1969. But Beatles are, I'm looking back. I'm looking at it from now. It's just like, I don't know. Don't touch them. They probably weren't as sacred back then.
Well, I don't know. There was a lot of artists that picked Beatles songs that were on albums and released in the singles and had hits with them. So maybe they thought that's what would happen, that they could release it and it'd be a hit. I don't know. But it was quite typical in the UK for people to be raiding the Beatles catalogue, understandably, really, I guess.
Sure, I get it. Yeah, I get it. What's your thoughts on Born to Be Wild?
Well, if you were looking at it through today's eyes, you would say, who needs another cover of this song? But the fact is, for me, the first time I heard Born to Be Wild was the version on Slade Alive. So I heard the Slade version before I actually heard the Steppenwolf version. I mean, it was a minor hit over here when it came out in the late 60s, but I didn't know it. So the Slade version was the first version I heard, although not this version of it, the one on Slade Alive. So I think it really suits Noddy's vocals. I like their rendition of it. They used to play it live. Every concert I went to, it was always the encore. So even up into the 80s, they were still doing Born to Be Wild as part of their set. So to me, it's kind of ingrained into what I think of as Slade. This version is a bit more psychedelic than the version on Slade Alive. So I don't like this version nearly as much. But I have no problem with Slade doing Born to Be Wild, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, I don't either, because that's like one of their concert staples. They're known for that. Like you said, they closed with it. They always closed with it. People expected them to play it and close with that track. Hey, I don't have a problem with it, but yes, it's a little bit more psychedelic. And I don't have a problem with that. It's like this whole psychedelic aspect of this record. I don't have a problem.
Well, it's a thing of its time, isn't it?
Yeah. So. Of course. And then we get little Ted Nugent, but Journey to the Center of Your Mind, okay, it's psychedelic. I mean, the original was psychedelic. And obviously, probably no one in the UK knew this track at all. No. But I like it. I don't have a problem with their version of it. They're not doing much anything new when I listen to it, but it's the vocals that are different. Yeah. I think musically it sounds very similar. I think Noddy sings it. It's not as psychedelic the way Noddy sings it. I think it's more straightforward rock. I like it, but I wasn't really familiar. I'd known the Slade version before I knew the Ted Nugent version. So gotcha.
And I think that's often the case, isn't it? The first version you hear is the one that kind of stays in your mind. So I think it's quite good. I quite like it. But again, it's not typical of what Slade were going to do later. I mean, it's very different from what Slade were going to do later.
So Parish, if you were going to rate this what would you rate this out of 10? If you were going to rate it, what would you rate it?
Well, interestingly, I've always had this as my least favourite Slade album, and therefore I very rarely played it. But I got recently the version I showed earlier was a re-release that came out earlier this year, and when I played it, I couldn't believe how much I liked it. Bearing in mind, for 50 years, it's been my least favourite Slade album. So it's moved off the bottom and moved up a bit in my eyes. So I think I would give it a 6.5 out of 10. And I think that's
pretty good. That's pretty strong.
That's driven by, I really like Dave Hill's guitar work on it. I think it shows he's a much better guitarist than maybe he gets credit for. I like the violins, the fiddle, particularly on that song we mentioned earlier, Pity the Mother. And I think Noddy's voice generally is pretty strong, although, as I say, he's a bit screechy. So it's raised up in my estimation over the last year, and I would give it a 6.5.
I would probably give this a 4 out of 10, just for the fact that I don't think anybody really needs to start out with this. If you're a completist and you want to check this out, I would. The playing's fine, the production is fine, the vocals are fine, everything is good, but it's not anything revolutionary or setting the world on fire for me. Yeah, it kind of sounds like Slade, but it's not the Slade that they become. But if you're curious on where they started out, I'd say, well, I could probably recommend, this is a series, so pay attention. But I think it's a fine record. It's okay, but it's just a minor album.
Well, what I would add to that is, if you like 60s psychedelic rock, this is actually quite a good album, I would say.
Right. Yeah.
And it's worth having a listen. And if you're not that keen on Slade in the 70s, you might find
you might like it better.
More than you might like it better, because it's not typical of what they do later. I think it's worth having. And as I say, I was pleasantly surprised when I came back to it for the first time in a long time earlier this year. So yeah, I think it's worth a listen.
Okay, there you go. All right, so let's move on to the second album, Slade, Play It Loud, 1970. This is a little bit different from the previous release. This is written by the band. This is the album that manager Chas Chandler produced. So Parish and I were talking a little bit before the show that Chas discovered him. Chas used to be in the Animals. He also discovered Jimi Hendrix. So I think Chas Chandler knows what to listen for. So he produced this. The band, if we're going to talk about, they changed their look. They went for a skinhead look on the album cover. I don't know why, but maybe just to create get a rise out of the reason, what was the reason?
Well, the reason for it was a Chas Chandler suggestion. And at the time, ska music was quite popular in around 1970 in the UK. Mm-hmm. And that skinhead. And while Slade didn't play that style of music, Chas Chandler thought if they look like skinheads, they'll appeal to the audience. Jim Lea tells a great story that they only looked like that for 2 gigs, because they didn't win over the fans based on the way they looked. The fact they didn't play ska music, they were just bottled off stage essentially. So it was a look that failed basically. Hence why the long hair came back and they changed the image. But yeah, it was Chas Chandler who thought they would be able to capitalize on what was a skinhead movement in 1970.
All right. So anyway, hey, it starts off with the track Raven. And like I said, there's I think there's one cover version on here. Yeah. Shape of Things to Come, which...
Two.
There's 2. Okay. Oh, yeah. Got it. Yeah, I see it. Shape of Things to Come, I really like quite a bit, jumping around.
Yeah.
But the album opens up with Raven. And on my first initial listen to this, now you have to admit, I must admit though, a lot of these records I haven't heard, and the whole concept for this show is to check out this band and, give first thoughts on stuff. Where Parish has heard these records. Some of these records I'm just going blind and listening to them.
Well, my
much heavier.
It's not coming up, but my version of the album I got secondhand in 1973, mm-hmm. and is an original release that came out in 1970. So I've had this album for 50 years. So you're coming to it fresh. I've lived with it all that time.
Well, since we started the series, I mean, I've heard the later records, but this wasn't one that I had heard. Raven, though, much heavier than the first LP. And I must say, since Chas is assuming the responsibility for the production, I think he does a great job, just like he did with Hendrix. It's a bit heavier. I like it. What's your thoughts with that opener?
Well, I would say on the album overall, I think it is quite a heavy album. Certainly for 1970, I think it's a pretty heavy album. And I think the other thing that's interesting, it's quite a dark album compared with what Slade became later. When you listen to the lyrics, there's some dark stories that are in what they're going through. So in that respect, it's quite different. But I think Raven is actually, it sounds more like classic Slade. It's not quite there yet to what was to come later, but you can definitely hear the sound. Noddy's voice is really strong. It's kind of a heavy boogie rock, I guess. And as an opener, I think it's the exact opposite of the last album where it had a weak opener. I think this is a strong opener for the album.
Oh, yeah. This is much more of a more fully realized album than a collection of tracks. So, yeah, I kind of look at this record and, Slade has arrived. See Us, here's the next track. I wrote on my notes, great riff. And I went, Don Powell. My God, what a good drummer. And the drums just kick in on this song. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I wrote on here, this sounds more like the Slade we love. Well, like you said, the whole record is much heavier. You've got Noddy is getting really gritty here in his vocals and the guitar riffs. Come on, Parish. The riffs are great.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Good. It's brilliant. I love it.
So interestingly, and it comes through the album actually, later the songs are written by Noddy Holder and Jim Lea, the bassist. Mm-hmm. But on this album, the drummer Don Powell co-writes almost all the songs.
Yeah.
And later you'll see that Noddy Holder doesn't actually write quite a lot of the songs too. So Don Powell actually seems to have had quite an influence on this album. And the drumming, I think, is for, as you say, is up there in the mix.
Oh.
Particularly on this song, it's very strong. I think the bass playing is really good on this song as well. You can hear Jim Lea a lot stronger on this album.
Yeah,
and it's quite funky. I think the bass line, I think, is quite funky on this.
It is, and I like the production on this record. I think this record sounds great. What a good recording. Like you said, you can really distinctly hear everybody playing on it, you know? So far, Parish, I'm in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dapple Rose, which is a Lee Powell song, because they wrote the majority of the whole record. I mean, you've got yeah. This seems more like that anthemic Slade, because when I think of Slade, I think of anthems, and this is a little bit more folky, but the chorus is catchy. It's getting closer to, See Us Here seems to be like pretty much Slade, but it's kind of anthemic. And so it fits right in there with those anthemic Slade songs when I hear it. I like it. And I don't mind a folky Slade at all, but it's very anthemic. And I
agree. I mean, I think it's a really strong ballad. I also think the chorus is really catchy. Yeah. Interestingly, it's a Lee Powell song. The thing that stands out for me, though, is the lyrics. Even though it's quite a jolly sounding chorus, when you listen to the lyrics, it's actually very dark. So it's and I wonder, Noddy Holder took over the lyrics later, and I wonder whether Don Powell was actually writing the lyrics more on these earlier songs. And I did wonder why Don Powell wasn't contributing to later albums. And then I realised, of course, in 1972, he had the car crash where his long-term memory went, or his short-term memory went, and he was never quite the same afterwards. So I wonder whether that's why he stopped contributing to the songwriting after the accident, because it's about the time when you see that he stops contributing. But on this album, he's involved in almost all of the songs, which I think is great. So it's a good. As you say, it's not quite the same as the songs like Every Day or that come later, but it's got that kind of feel for, as you say, for what it's going to become. So yes, I think it's a good song. One of my favourites on the album.
They also do a cover. We're mentioning covers. They did a cover of "I Could," which is a Jimmy Griffin, Rob Royer song. And if you recognize those songwriters, well, ladies and gentlemen, that's a cover off the 1969 Bread album.
Yeah.
It's odd, but it works. It works.
Well, they rock it up. I think.
Yeah, they do.
Said Slade did if somebody said to you Slade do a Bread song, this is what you'd probably imagine it would sound like.
Yeah.
So it's faster. It's rocked up. Noddy's voice is strong. It's very different, I think, to the original. Whereas on the first album, we said the cover versions generally followed and were faithful to the original. This is, I think, is very different to the Bread version. And as I say, if you can imagine Bread being covered by Slade, that's exactly what it sounds like. So, job done, I think, in that respect.
Well, we keep going. So we've got One Way Hotel, which is another self-penned song. A short one. These songs on here are really short. A little more bluesy. The middle part of this song really rocks. I think it's great. And then we have another cover, The Shape of Things to Come, which I'm not really familiar. Well, when I played this, I'm going, man, this has to be a cover because I know it sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. But evidently it was from the film Wild in the Streets. And a fictional band, Max Frost and the Troopers, played it. But I don't know. I like it. Talk about obscure. Slade would pick obscure covers like we've mentioned before. Anyway, what's your thoughts with these two tracks?
Well, I think One Way Hotel's okay. I mean, as you say, there's some good guitar work in it, but I think generally it's kind of average. It's okay.
You could consider it filler. I think it's not.
Yeah, I think
major
so.
track.
But it's fine. Shape of Things to Come is for me is the best song on the album. You can see why they released it as a single.
I agree 100%.
Until quite recently, because you go and investigate, don't you, and listen on Spotify or whatever. And it's very different to the original. It's much rockier. It's a great version, I think. The guitar work again is very good. You can hear the original. When you hear the two, you know it's the same song.
Right.
But I wouldn't have thought that song would be as good as it is with Slade doing. I think the original is very, very average, and I think the Slade version is a great version. So
I love the Slade version's great.
Chaz Chandler, because he had an ear for.
Yeah.
I think Chaz Chandler has an ear for these things, so I suspect he picked it, and I think it's a great version. So
great song.
Yeah, I think my favourite track on the album. Mm.
So side two starts off with "You Know Who You Are," another track written by the band. The thing about this record that I don't know if I want to compare it to the first album, but I mentioned the production earlier. The production here just seems so open, and there's not a lot of clutter. It's really a joy to listen to, and I really hear it like on this track. But the thing is, man, they really get heavy on that second part of this song, and I think it's I don't know. What's your thoughts on this track?
I mean, the first
way to open side too.
This is the reworking of Genesis, which opened the first album.
Right.
Can you imagine if it had been this version that had opened the album?
It might have.
It would have been that statement of intent that we said that it might, you know. So I think this is really good. And you're right. Whereas the original version's quite mellow. This isn't mellow at all.
You wouldn't even really,
for the time, it's heavy.
Yeah. But Parish, you wouldn't even really recognize it's the same song unless you pointed it out.
No. And when you're playing back to back, you can see that it's got similarities. But I think it's really strong. I think Dave Hill again is the star on this song.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, people talk about who created heavy rock in the late 60s, early 70s. Nobody talks about Slade, but if you played them this song, they would realise that Slade were right in there with some of the other people like Purple and Zeppelin, etc., doing heavy music at that time. I think it's a great song.
I think it's great. I think it's a good way to open up side 2. Got another Jim Lea, Don Powell song, I Remember. And I wrote in my notes, I said, man, the band is improving for sure. And I think I made another note how the production on this album, I'm very impressed with it. Because, you know, Chaz probably learned how to produce. Well, he had his tenure in the Animals. He ought to know his way around. And the work that he did with Jimi Hendrix, we can't argue with that. It's great work. And what he does with Slade, I think it just carries on. I think it's another good track. I think Jim and Don as songwriters have grown immensely from the debut. You know. Yeah,
I mean, I've just written down another heavy song. I think it continues from the first one. It's great, very powerful. I mean, not much more to add, really. I think, it's a really good song.
So we have another one. Well, we have now a Jim Lea Holder Powell song, Polk Hill. And I wrote in my notes, I said, my God, the guitars sound great on here.
Yeah.
Man, it's raw. It reminds me, okay, I'm going to throw it out here, Parish. Kind of reminds me of mid-60s Who.
Yeah.
Like mid-66, 67, that Pete Townsend guitar sound, which I love that period of the Who.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
So Polk Hill is a landmark near where Noddy Holder grew up. So it's kind of their version of Penny Lane, I suppose. They're talking about, you know, something that was where they lived when they grew up. I think it's again a very strong song. I think it's very catchy. Of their own. So Shape of Things to Come is my favourite on the album, but of the songs they've written, this is my favourite song on the album. I think it's a really strong song. And again, it just shows you the sort of how they're going to grow into the band they're going to come. I mean, it's not untypical of the type of songs they wrote in the 70s, I think. So, yeah, I think it's a great song.
Excellent. Now,
you're right, the guitar is... In fact, I think now you've said it, I think quite a lot of the guitar is quite like Pete Townsend, actually.
Oh, yeah. I even wrote it down. Even some of the later tracks kind of remind me of that whole Pete Townsend, the way he approaches it, the way he plays the chords, his tonality of Pete during that time. But I mean, it's all in that era, so I get it. But yeah, it kind of reminds me of Pete. Angelina. Another basic rock and roll track, which is another cover. I don't know. What's your thoughts on this? Was okay. It didn't do much for me, but I don't know. What's your thoughts?
It's by Neil Innes, who was the Bonzo Dog Doodah band. Also the Ruttles, for those who know.
But this was
Ruttles were.
Was this pre Bonzo Doodah band now?
It must have been.
I think it is.
It seems. I don't know what the band was called actually, but it certainly seemed. It's not a Bonzo Dog Doodah. It's too serious for them to be one of theirs.
Right.
And as you say, I mean, I quite like the song. I just don't think it particularly suits Slade, to be honest. Nobody's vocals, I don't think, are particularly strong on it. And I think, as I say, I don't think it fits in particularly well with what they're trying to do on this album.
No, I don't think it fits in
so it seems an odd choice to it seems an odd choice to me on what they've picked, really.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Neil Innes in the World. This came out on Liberty in 1970. So that was fairly recent. So this must have been around at the same time the Bonzo Doodah, the Bonzo Dog Band was around. This is 1970.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wasn't familiar with it. So,
no, me neither.
I don't know. But it's okay. It doesn't fit in with the rest of the album. Dirty Joker, we got another Jim Lea, Don Powell song. Heavy rocker with wah-wah pedal. I mean, it's 1960s heavy. It's catchy. It's a tad psychedelic. You've got those processed vocals, which are very thick. I mean, it's not like Sweet vocals or Queen, but it's kind of close. I think it's good. I like this track quite a bit. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so do I. I think both this and the next one finish the album off really well. They're similar in that they're both up tempo, heavy rockers, both written by Liam Powell. I think they're both really good songs. The last two, and Dirty Joker is probably the better of the two.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think a strong finish to the album.
Yeah, Sweet Box, another Jim and Don song. Great track, raw, very raw. I love it. Great melody, and I wrote on my notes, almost mid-60s Who-like. There's like a nod to the Who, and I don't have any problem with that. Like I said, I love that stuff. So how would you what would you rate this out of 10? I think it's a better album.
7.
That's for sure. 7. I would give this a 6 out of 10. I always rate stuff low, Parish. I don't know why, but it's getting there.
I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult that if I was to rank it against later Slade albums, I don't like it as much as what's to follow. But if I rate it purely as an album in its own right, I think it's a very good heavy rock album for 1970. So
yeah, there's a lot of great tracks on here that things are coming together. If someone's looking at this record, and if you saw it out in the used section or something, I would say pick it up. I think it's a decent start.
You saying about the Who connection reminds me that Pete Townsend, I heard Pete Townsend on an interview say that in the 70s, up 70s to 75, competing to be the loudest and the heaviest band. And he said that every time he went to see Slade, he knew that they had to notch up because Slade had sort of got louder and heavier, so then the Who would have to notch up. So I wonder actually whether, I don't know, but I do wonder whether there was actually more going on between the bands. You saying about Dave Hill's playing being similar. I wonder whether that was part of that sort of competitiveness.
It would not surprise me.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, anybody down below that knows anything maybe about that, I don't know. Was there a rivalry? I know, maybe what you mentioned, but was there something like that going on in the late 60s between the bands? I'd be interested to know because I definitely hear a Who influence. I mean, and it kind of goes away later, but I really hear it on this record. So anyway, I'm giving it a 6. You give it a 5 out of 10? Wait a minute. What did you say? 7. So I think that's fair. Yeah. I think that's about right. So anyway, there you go. We just tackled our 2 Slade albums. So Parish, tell everybody what we're going to be doing next month.
So next month we're going to do the 2 albums that really put Slade on the map. So we're going to do Slade Alive, which was their first hit album and had their first hit single. And then we're going to do Slade, Slade, which was really their first hit album with their own.
Big record.
Yeah, with a number of their hits on. So they're the next 2. So we're now going to move into typical Slade sound of music, and what became then. So yeah, exciting, the next two.
Yeah, it's going to be good. All right, real quick, do me a favor, because you cut out. Say that last sentence again. About moving to now
Which
we're
bit?
getting to the next section. The next, for Slade.
Right. Okay. So we're now moving into the period of Slade where they became famous. So you've got Slade. So we're now moving into the section of Slade where they become famous. So you've got Slade Alive and you've got Slade ? And these were the two albums that really broke them in the UK. And their hit singles came from those two albums to start with. So really exciting where we're moving on to next.
So there you go. Please leave a comment down below. Let us know how you feel about these records. We look at the comments and we'll respond, and you can tell if we looked at them or not. But please let us know what you think about this. Let us know if you like we're doing the Slade series. We're going to go through the whole catalog, so brace yourself. So Parish, I want to thank you for coming on and doing this series with me. I can't imagine anybody else doing it. This is great. And really, all Parish and I are trying to do is turn you on to stuff. So let us know what you think of these. And if you pick these albums up, let us know what you think. All right, Parish, I will be in contact. We will set up date for December, probably early December, and we will circle around and do another show.
Well, and Slade Alive is obviously a historic album because it influenced Kiss, influenced the Ramones, it influenced Cheap Trick. So you're now getting to, I would say, one of the most important records in rock and roll, I would suggest, with Slade Alive. So it's going to be really good to talk about it.
Yeah, you wouldn't have Kiss Alive ! Without Slade Alive. Yeah. Well, that's why that's where they took it from.
It was, but Joey Ramone said that Slade Alive was what inspired him, and hence why you had It's Alive when they released their live album. But Joey Ramone said that when the Ramones started, in his head, he was Noddy Holder. He was trying to imitate Noddy Holder. So you look at those. You look at the influence on Cheap Trick, who's another band who said that Slade Alive sort of started their career. So I would suggest one of the most important. And the next comment's going to sound really trivial, but Slash with the top hat, he stole that from Noddy Holder's in his top hat. So Noddy Holder had the mirrors on it, but Slash pitched the image of Noddy Holder with the hat. So even to the point of Guns N' Roses, we're influenced by Slade.
So there you go. A lot of great stuff coming in the warehouse.
Yeah.
All right, Parish. We will see you. I'll be in contact. Everybody, please like, subscribe if you haven't. And we'll see you on the next one. All right.